My name is Tessa Whitmore and I'm 32 years old. The first thing I noticed wasn't the smell of roast turkey. It wasn't the laughter coming from the dining room. It was the empty space where my chair had always been. Every Sunday evening my parents hosted a family dinner. For as long as I could remember, everyone sat in the exact same seat around Grandpa Henry's handmade oak table. Dad sat at the head. Mom sat beside him. My younger brother Trevor sat across from me. I always sat beside Grandpa. That chair had been mine since I was 12 years old, but that Sunday, it was gone. I stood frozen in the doorway holding a homemade apple pie I'd spent 2 hours baking. "Mom," I asked with a nervous smile, "where's my chair?" Nobody answered. Trevor suddenly became very interested in his phone. Dad kept cutting his steak without looking up. Then Mom calmly folded her napkin and looked straight at me. "Sorry, dear," she smiled politely. "Family only." For a second, I honestly thought she was joking. "What?" She pointed toward the dining table. "There isn't enough room anymore." I looked around. There were still 8 people, 8 plates, 8 chairs. The only difference, my chair had been replaced by Trevor's new father-in-law, a man who had known our family for less than a year. I laughed awkwardly. "Mom, I'm your daughter," she sighed. "You have your own apartment. You have your own career. Dinner is for the family that still lives close." Room became painfully quiet. I looked at Dad. He wouldn't even meet my eyes. Then I looked at Grandpa Henry. He hadn't arrived yet. He was always the last person to come because walking had become difficult after his hip surgery. Mom picked up another serving spoon. "If you want, there's food in the kitchen. You can eat after everyone else." That sentence hurt more than anything she'd said before, not because I was hungry, but because she had already decided. I no longer belonged at the table. I quietly placed the pie on the kitchen counter. "I understand." I turned and walked toward the front door. Behind me, Mom casually called out, "Take care driving home." No one stopped me, no one stood up, no one said, "Wait, she belongs here." I stepped outside. Tears blurred my vision as I reached my car, but before I could open the driver's door, a dark blue pickup truck slowly pulled into the driveway. Grandpa Henry climbed out with his wooden cane. He looked toward the dining room window. Then at me standing alone outside. His smile disappeared instantly. He frowned and asked just one question. "Tessa, why isn't your chair at my table?" Grandpa Henry looked from my face to the dining room window, then back at me. He already knew something was wrong. "I asked you a question, sweetheart. Are you standing outside?" I tried to smile. "It's nothing." He shook his head. "No, never starts with nothing." Hesitated, then quietly answered, "They removed my chair." Grandpa frowned. "What do you mean?" Swallowed hard. Mom said. I could barely force the words out. "Sorry, family only." Grandpa's expression changed instantly. Without saying another word, he picked up his cane and walked straight toward the front door. I followed behind him. The moment we entered the dining room, everyone stood. "Hi, Dad," Mom smiled nervously. Grandpa ignored her. His eyes immediately searched the table, 7 familiar chairs, and 1 chair occupied by Trevor's father-in-law. The chair beside Grandpa, the one that had belonged to me for 20 years, was gone. Grandpa slowly turned toward my mother. "Where is Tessa's seat?" Mom forced a laugh. "We just didn't have enough room." Grandpa looked around the room again. "There seems to be plenty of room." Dad finally spoke. "We thought it was better this way." Grandpa rested both hands on his cane. "Better for who?" Nobody answered. Finally, Mom sighed. "Tessa doesn't really need to be here every week." Trevor's in-laws are family now. Grandpa's eyes narrowed. "So, my granddaughter isn't." The room became painfully quiet. Trevor looked embarrassed. His father-in-law immediately stood up. "I had no idea. I can leave." Grandpa gently shook his head. "This isn't your mistake." Then he looked directly at my parents. "It belongs to the 2 people who forgot who built this family." Dad tried to calm the situation. "Dad, you're overreacting." Grandpa smiled. "No, been underreacting for years." He slowly reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. Everyone watched silently. He pulled out a small sealed envelope. Across the front, written in his own handwriting, were the words, "Open only if Tessa is ever treated as less than family." My heart stopped. Mom's face turned pale. Dad stared at the envelope without blinking. Grandpa calmly handed it to me. "I prayed I'd never have to give you this. Today," he looked around the table one last time, "you all made my decision for me." Inside the envelope was a handwritten letter, and one sentence changed everything. "Tomorrow morning, my attorney will be joining us for breakfast. No one leaves until the truth is heard." The next morning, nobody touched the breakfast on the table, not my father, not my mother, not even Trevor. At exactly 9:00 a.m. the front doorbell rang. Grandpa smiled. "He's here." A tall man in a navy suit walked inside carrying a black leather briefcase. "Good morning," he said. "My name is Daniel Mercer, represented Henry Whitmore for the last 12 years. Dad forced a smile. "I'm sure this is all just a misunderstanding." "Mr. Mercer calmly placed his briefcase on the table. "I don't believe it is." He removed a thick folder, then another. Finally, he placed a sealed envelope in front of Grandpa. Grandpa nodded. "Open it." Lawyer carefully broke the seal. Inside was a handwritten letter he began reading aloud. To my family. If this letter is being read, it means one thing. Someone has treated Tessa as if she no longer belongs in this family. Mom's face immediately lost its colour. Grandpa had predicted everything, the lawyer continued. For years, Tessa has been the one driving me to doctor's appointments, repaired my roof after the storm, spent every Christmas Eve with me after Grandma passed away, never asked for money, never asked for recognition. She simply showed up. Was completely silent. Then came the sentence nobody expected. If anyone removes her seat from this table, they have already removed themselves from my trust. Dad looked up in shock. What trust? The lawyer opened another folder. This one. He slid several documents across the table. Mr. Whitmore created a family legacy trust 3 years ago. Whispered, I've never heard of it. You weren't supposed to, the lawyer replied. He adjusted his glasses. Trust contains the lake cabin, Grandpa's investment portfolio, and approximately $1.9 million in financial assets. Trevor's mouth fell open. Dad looked ready to faint. Then Mr. Mercer read the final condition. If Tessa is ever treated as less than family, every beneficiary except Tessa is immediately removed from the trust. Nobody breathed. The lawyer quietly closed the folder. I'm sorry. Yesterday activated that clause. Dad stood up so quickly his chair nearly tipped over. That's impossible, Mr. Mercer calmly pushed the signed documents across the table. No, it's completely legal. He looked directly at my parents. You didn't just remove Tessa's chair. You removed yourselves from Henry Whitmore's final gift. Fell into complete silence for the first time. Everyone realized that one empty chair had cost them everything. The room was silent. No one argued anymore. My father slowly sat back down, staring at the trust documents as if they were written in another language. My mother finally broke the silence. Henry, you would really do this? Grandpa looked at her with tears in his eyes. No, you did. You made this decision the moment you looked at my granddaughter and told her she wasn't family. No one could answer. Trevor quietly stood up. He walked over to me. Sorry, Tess. I should have said something yesterday. I saw your chair was missing, but I stayed quiet. I gave him a small smile. Sometimes silence hurts just as much as words. He lowered his head. I know. Attorney Daniel Mercer gathered the documents before speaking again. Trust cannot be challenged. Mr. Whitmore followed every legal requirement. The beneficiaries were changed the moment yesterday's condition was met. Dad rubbed his face with both hands. We've ruined everything. Grandpa slowly shook his head. No, you ruined something far more important than money. You ruined your daughter's place in this family. Those words hit harder than any legal document ever could. A week later, Grandpa officially moved into my home, not because he needed someone to care for him, but because, as he jokingly told everyone, I prefer living with someone who remembers to save me a chair. We laughed together. For the first time in years, it felt like home. Months later, my parents asked if we could have dinner together. I agreed when I walked into the dining room. There were 6 chairs around the table. Then Dad quietly carried in one more. He placed it beside Grandpa's usual seat, my chair, the same style, the same cushion, the same place it had always been. Mom looked at me with tears in her eyes. This seat was never supposed to disappear. I hope you'll sit here again. I looked at Grandpa. He smiled and nodded, so I sat down, not because the chair mattered, but because respect did. People often think families fall apart because of one huge betrayal. Sometimes they fall apart because of one empty chair, and sometimes the greatest revenge isn't taking everything away. It's reminding people that the person they treated as if they didn't belong was the one holding the whole family together all along.